Ladies and gentlemen, this is a warning. Thank you.
An FBI trainee. A brilliant psychotic. Mind against mind.
What does he do, this man you seek?
Clue for clue.
I'll have you catch him, Clary.
You know who he is, don't you?
She's playing a game she can't lose.
Tell me his name, Doctor.
To find a killer, she must stop. The Silence of the Lambs, rated R.
In 1991, the film Silence of the Lambs would be released to much critical acclaim. The story of a convicted serial killer helping the FBI was based on the infamous story of Ted Bundy helping consult on the Green River Killer case. While the FBI may be willing to work with convicted killers, no one would ever conceive they would release one and allow him to operate while working for them. But in 2006, when Scott Lee Kimball was arrested for fraud, they would realize they had inadvertently not only allowed a serial killer out of jail, but paid him as an informant to get close to some of his victims. Under a myriad of lies and deceit, Scott had been free to kill over a 4-year period, even calling himself Hannibal. While he has confessed to 4 murders, he has bragged of many more, suspected of as many as 21. How could an agency tasked with stopping killers enable one to operate right under their noses?
Goes on in San Francisco for the man known as the Zodiac Killer.
There could be a serial killer in Chicago.
The Oakland County child killer.
Phantom Killer.
Frankfurt slasher.
4 children have now been murdered.
Has killed 5 and says he's going to kill again.
15 brutally murdered young women.
The pattern is the same.
One by one,
the death count started rising.
A man in a mask robbed, tied, and stabbed them.
Strangled, stuffed in burlap bags.
It is highly unlikely that these women were murdered by separate men.
Where will the killer strike next?
Police can't answer who or why.
That's the question that we'll never know.
I don't want to live the rest of my life wondering if this person's going to be caught.
I believe that there's someone out there that has knowledge.
And he's probably still at large.
If you know Ruin Road, you know we value our privacy. But in our personal life, it's not always easy to maintain. Whether we know it or not, sites will mine our data like full name, email, health records, and more, which they will sell to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who wants to snoop. That's why we started using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows us which data brokers are selling our personal information and automatically submits opt-out requests on our behalf. This not only reduces the amount of spam you'll get, but protects against hackers who can use this information to gain access to our social media, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also provides a ton of other features bundled into one easy-to-use app at an affordable price. You get antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more without needing to bother with different apps. We all have one or more of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. And if you're a regular viewer, you'll know how often that happens. Like 24-hour security, motion sensors, and guard dogs, Aura is always on, doing the hard work of keeping my info safe so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. Relaxing. Ruin Road values our privacy, and we also value yours. Go to aura.com/ruinroad to start a free 2-week trial, also linked below in the description. It was 1966 when Scott was born to Barb and Virgil Kimball in Lafayette, Colorado. He would be described as a quiet child growing up. When he was 10, his mother came out as a lesbian and his parents divorced. This event would be very traumatic for Scott, who began to act out, including an incident where he fired a gun from his house at the other homes around him. Shortly after, Scott and his youngest brother would be moved to his grandmother's mobile home. While there, the boy drew the attention of neighbor Theodore Payton, a 41-year-old man who began to groom the boy. Over the next 5 or so years, Payton would take Scott and another child on camping trips to his cabin in Nederland, where he would give them alcohol and then assault the boys, threatening them with a gun if they ever told. Finally, in 1981, Scott would move to Hamilton, Montana to live with his father and younger brother. He would attend school but dropped out his senior year. In 1988, he would be arrested after giving out over $1,000 worth of bad checks to motels, a felony, but he was allowed to stay out of jail if he went straight. He didn't, and less than 4 months later, he would be arrested for the same crime. But as it was a different county, police did not link the two crimes, and he was yet again allowed to remain out of jail. He would immediately move back down to Colorado and be arrested for breaking into 2 homes and stealing items, sentenced to 1 year jail time. Following his release, he went back to Montana. One day, while he and his brother were out hunting, Scott placed his rifle to his forehead and fired. The blast would leave a gaping hole in his forehead, but Scott survived. Relatives would say that after he recovered, he was never the same, seeming to lose his conscience. Kimball would go into counseling after this, and if anything positive could come of the event, it was during the sessions that he shared why he did it, finally telling the years of abuse at the hands of Theodore Payton. In the years since, Payton had joined the Big Brothers program but was kicked out after, quote, contradictory reports with a child in his care. He would be sentenced to 7 years for his abuse of Kimball and the other boy. Kimball would write a letter to the judge when it was learned that a reduction in sentence for Payton was being considered, stating how the man had denied Scott a normal childhood and the monster had damaged his life forever. Payton would be released in 1996 and live a free man until he died of heart disease in 2017.
For the first time in public, Mr. and Mrs. Scott and Larissa Kimball.
Meanwhile, Scott had moved into Spokane, Washington with his new wife, Larissa Hentz, and the pair had 2 sons, but in 1997 they would get divorced, after his wife tired of Scott's infidelities and constant scamming of people.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
He would move back to Montana yet again, where he would serve a 27-day jail sentence for an unknown crime. At some point after this, he would get linked with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, serving as an informant in 1999. That same year, his ex-wife reported that he had kidnapped her and the 2 children, forcing them to come back to Montana as well as sexually assaulting her over multiple instances. Police would choose not to pursue the case against Kimball and noted that the man could fool lie detector tests. Finally, in 2000, he would be arrested for violating parole and was sentenced to 10 years prison time. Despite the judge stating he was impossible to watch or behave in a community setting, just 1 year later, Kimball managed to get on a pre-release work program and work as a cashier at the Easy Stop gas station in Helena, Montana. It wasn't long before he stole the money from the cash register and fled. A few months later, he would be arrested in Cordova, Alaska for passing bad checks using his brother's name, even getting engaged to a woman while up there. While imprisoned in Alaska, Kimball would tell the Secret Service his cellmate had asked Scott to hire a hitman to kill a judge, federal prosecutor, and 2 witnesses, and he would be convicted of that crime. Kimball would be transferred to federal prison Inglewood in Littlewood, Colorado after reporting that he had had death threats against him for being a snitch. While here, he would yet again report that his roommate, Stephen Enos, asked him to kill for him, saying his girlfriend would help. That girlfriend was Jennifer Markham. As a child, Jennifer was described as a wildcat with a penchant for mischief. She had spent some time in foster homes growing up, eventually dropping out of high school and moving to Colorado Springs. After having a son, she began stripping at the club Shotgun Willie's. Her first day was even the center of a news piece where she was interviewed. She would soon get a divorce and began dating Stephen Enos, a drug dealer, and shortly after the couple was arrested during a drug bust in New York City. Jennifer would not be charged, but Steve was sent to FCI Inglewood, where Scott Kimball would eventually become his cellmate. The FBI would release Kimball from prison as an active informant to pursue the case against Enos. Creating a fake identity for him, they would order Scott to keep an eye on Markham. Upon release, he would phone the girlfriend of another inmate, Stephen Hawley. Calling himself Hannibal, Scott would tell Leanne Emery that Stephen had asked that he get in touch with her to plan a prison escape. Hawley told Leanne to listen to whatever Scott said so they can begin a new life in New Mexico. Like Jennifer, Leanne had been a bright girl who fell into trouble. As a child, she loved animals, but suffered severe back pain after a cracking of vertebrae. But Leanne wouldn't be held back from this, graduating from high school a year early and winning a Community Service Award from President Clinton for her volunteer work. She became a veterinary technician and had a particular fondness for Dalmatians, getting a custom license plate saying, Dal Gal. Sadly, Leanne would get married to a former high school classmate who would come into her life again asking her help in raising his bail. He began to abuse her, and Leanne would become a stripper for private parties. In 1999, she would be arrested for threatening to shoot her husband and then herself. Finally, the pair divorcing in 2002, and she began dating Stephen Hawley before he would return to prison. Meanwhile, Kimball had also gotten in contact with Jennifer Markham, attempting to catch her on recordings soliciting the murder. Though they spoke over a dozen times, the only piece of evidence collected was Jennifer stating the man was a scumbag who deserved to die. Kimball would also state that he could get Jennifer a fresh start in Washington, an idea supported by her boyfriend. He would also start a relationship with Leanne, conning her into buying him a laptop. In emails to her cousin, Leanne stated that the man she knew as Hannibal was a major blessing in her life, but that he would kill her if he learned she was talking to her cousin. On January 16, 2003, Leanne would leave her parents' home in Centennial on a 2-week-long trip across 5 states with Kimball. Ominously, before she left, she phoned her sister stating, "If anything bad should happen to me, know that I love you." On her trip, she would rack up over $4,000 of bad checks at hotels, as well as purchasing a .40 caliber Firestar handgun in Oregon. Scott, who was still being monitored by the FBI, would meet her periodically on the trip, but also had to leave to check in with the FBI at Washington. The pair returned to Colorado on January 27th, where Leanne would stay at the Super 8 Motel in Grand Junction for 2 days. On January 29th, she would check out and seemingly vanish. In reality, Scott had invited her to go hiking in Bryson Canyon, Utah. Telling his FBI agent that he was going to California to see his brother, Scott would turn off his cell phone for 2 days while he went to the canyon with Leanne, taking the gun she had purchased and forcing her to strip nude, get on her knees, and then shoot her in the head. On February 1st, police would discover her car left on a desolate road in the Harley Dome area of Utah, less than 10 miles away from the Colorado border. All of her belongings were left in the car: cell phone, purse, camping gear, and caving gear. 1 day after that, Scott would hire a sex worker in the resort town of Indian Wells, California. Either he gave her or she would take Leanne's credit card and began to use it on her own. 1 week later, Kimball is back in Colorado, and he takes his wheelchair-bound mother to the Lodge Casino in Black Hawk, about an hour southwest of Boulder. It was on this day that 39-year-old Lori McLeod noticed Scott. A regular at the Boston 5-card poker table, Lori lived with her 19-year-old daughter Casey McLeod in Westminster, a suburb of Denver.
Casey's getting ready to start 5th grade. This is September.
Divorcing when she was 6, the two parents had disagreed on how to raise Casey, resulting in her eventually being sent to live with an aunt in Phoenix, Arizona at the age of 15. While there, she would fall in with a bad crowd and become addicted to meth and prescription pills.
I'm really confident that I'll be able to do something with my life after this, so I just want to thank you for inviting me.
Post-high school graduation, she would move back with her mother in Colorado and try to turn her life around. It was Valentine's Day 2003 when Scott would take her mother out and the pair quickly began dating. At the same time, Jennifer Markham would move out of her ex-husband's home and into Kimball's condominium in the gated community of Windsor Townhomes in Lakewood. He would live in the back center section at 8210 West Eastman Place. Jennifer was under the impression that Kimball operated an espresso cart business in Seattle, which he had promised her he would set her up in. She would phone her boyfriend Steve Venus in prison on February 17th, telling him that she was leaving in the morning. That would be the last known time Jennifer was ever seen. Both Jennifer and Scott's phones would go inactive for 3 days, during which time Kimball told his FBI agent he had gone for a hike in the mountains. After that, Kimball returned to Seattle, where he claimed to have information on the 2001 murder of U.S. Attorney Tom Wales in Seattle, Washington, though nothing came of the information. At the same time, Leanne Emery's father would contact the Denver branch of the FBI after receiving 2 worried letters from her boyfriend, Stephen Hawley, concerned that he hadn't heard from Leanne and she was in over her head on something. The FBI agent told the father that he wasn't going to waste his time contacting Hawley and that he was likely lying. A week later, Kimball would appear in the Denver office to sign a plea deal that if he continued to work on as an informant, he would receive the lowest possible sentence for his crimes in Alaska. On March 27th, Jennifer Markham's car, which had sat at the lot in the Denver International Airport, would be impounded. Kimball would tell his FBI agent that Jennifer had purchased a gun and flown to New York City to do the hit herself, though no records of her arriving or leaving the airport could be found. They would still keep Kimball on the streets, and the following month, he was back to his old tricks. When another convict just released from FCI Inglewood asked Scott to pick up his trailer and cash a check for him, Scott would simply take off with the money and vehicle. A month after that, on May 14th, Casey McLeod would be arrested for using a stolen credit card, reportedly confessing after Scott spoke with her privately for 45 minutes. On May 27th, after failing to appear in Washington, a warrant for Scott's arrest would be issued and his status as a paid FBI informant would be revoked. On June 17th, Denver police would arrest Scott for that warrant. His agent would question him about where Jennifer Markham was, to which he responded that a drug dealer had shown him photos of the woman bound and gagged before being strangled. He says that the dealer offered Scott money to remove the woman's breast implants and IUD as they had numbers on them that could be used to identify her. He would take a polygraph test, which he passed, and yet again, the FBI released him with Kimball's promises that he would help catch the killer, and just 2 weeks later after his arrest, Scott was reactivated as a paid informant. They even gave him an extra $2,000 to move out of his condo and to rent this home in Broomfield, about 30 minutes north of Denver. He would also move Lori and Casey McLeod in with him. On August 21st, Scott would tell Lori he found a vial of drugs in her daughter's room, prompting a fight in which Casey left on her bike. Staying at this Motel 6 with her boyfriend in Thornton, about halfway between Broomfield and Denver. Scott would comfort Lori, telling her the girl just needed some time on her own. 2 days later, Scott would drop by the motel to talk with the couple, after which he offered to drive Casey back up to Broomfield for her job at a Subway. She accepted the ride in Scott's truck, which was noted as having the stolen trailer attached in the back. After they pulled out of the lot, Casey would never be seen again. For 20 hours, Scott's phone would be shut off, during which he claims he went hunting. When he reactivated it, he was in Walden, a small town in the center-north section of the state. A receipt showed that he had gone to the North Park Supers Market and purchased pasta, meat, spaghetti sauce, and lighter fluid. He would return several missed calls from Casey's boyfriend, who was worried that she had never shown up for work, but Scott insisted he was alone and had not picked her up. On August 31st, about half a year after meeting, Scott and Lori would get married in Las Vegas on a trip funded by the $18,000 check Kimball had just received from the FBI for being a witness and the tip on the hit his cellmate in Alaska had been planning. Lori had been worried about her missing daughter, fearing Scott had something to do with it, but telling herself she was wrong, and that his FBI contacts could help him find the girl. In the meantime, Scott had been gaslighting her into thinking her daughter was still around, moving things in a room at the home and asking their landlord to say he had also seen the girl back at home. Though Lori was still missing her daughter, Scott would insist they went on a honeymoon to the Red Mountain RV Park in Kremlin, Colorado on September 14th, about an hour's drive south of Walden. Seemingly just an innocent choice in an area he knew, Lori would learn the dark reason for his location later. When they returned back home, Scott would start his first legitimate business, the Faith Farms Beef Company, where he would purchase cattle to sell at auction. By the end of the year, his trial for the Alaska crime would go to sentencing, and as promised, he received the lightest possible sentence, allowing him to remain a free man. In March 2004, Jennifer Markham's father had asked a friend in the police department to run a check for his daughter in the National Criminal Database, a search which flagged Agent Schlaff. He would yet again question Kimball, who passed the polygraph test and produced a signed agreement with Jennifer on why he still had her furniture. Schlaff would never tell Jennifer's father of any of these details, simply stating she had dropped off the face of the map. Bob Markham would get his daughter listed as a missing persons case on May 7th, just a day before the trailer that Kimball had stolen mysteriously burned, allowing him to collect insurance money. On July 15th, Scott would bring his 10-year-old son into the hospital, stating the boy was injured while he was at his house and then accidentally fell out of the Jeep on the rush over. However, once the boy regained consciousness, he stated that his father had instructed him to dig a hole near a 200-pound metal grate behind the house which fell on him, and then purposely shoved him from the Jeep. Due to his head injury, he was determined to be an unreliable witness, and police were unable to prosecute Scott. It was noted that Kimball was the sole beneficiary of the boy's $60,000 life insurance policy, but after learning of the incident, Scott's mother immediately had him removed from it. While the boy recuperated at home, Scott's uncle, Terry Kimball, came to visit and help out, ending up staying indefinitely to work for the Faith Farms business. Almost immediately, Scott began using Terry's bank account to steal over $23,000 from the bank by the process of check kiting, which put simply is using the processing time of checks to transfer funds to take money out that doesn't really exist. When the bank caught on and reported Scott to the FBI, nothing would come of it. Less than 6 weeks after Terry moved in, one day, he would vanish. Lori came home from work at the end of August 2004 to find her couch sitting outside covered in what appeared to be vomit. Scott told her one of their dogs did it while also saying that his uncle had won the lottery back at home in Ohio and gone on a road trip to Mexico with a stripper. A week later, Terry's wife back home would file for divorce after having not seen him for 6 weeks. She had spoken with Scott and heard the story about the lottery, and knew that Terry had disappeared in the past with women, this time being the final straw. What she did not know, however, was that Scott was using Terry's credit card over the next month, using it to travel back to Montana as well as Alaska. In October, Scott would start another business in the basement of this small building in Lafayette, Colorado, partnering with his mother and brother to form Rocky Mountain All Natural Beef, an organic beef distribution company. He would continue using bad checks as Terry Kimball, including almost $12,000 to purchase cattle in Brush, Colorado. In 2005, Scott would take and pass another polygraph test, this time on his involvement with Casey McLeod's disappearance. By now, Lori wasn't so sure, and on July 9th, she would be arrested for throwing a vacuum cleaner at him, threatening to kill Scott at their home, which she claimed was a lie made up by Scott. Shortly after, 39-year-old Scott began dating 25-year-old Perkins waitress Melissa Anderson. He would report that Lori violated his restraining order against her, sending her to jail. By now, Jennifer Markham's parents had arrived in Denver and began putting up missing persons photos of their daughter around town. Though the FBI would not tell them who the man who had Jennifer's furniture was, Agent Schlaff finally gave them Kimball's phone number and said to ask for Joe Snitch.
Hello? Joe? Hello? Hello? Joe?
Yeah, this is Joe.
Yeah, it's Mary.
Hey, Mary, what's up?
I've been trying to get a hold of you.
They agreed to meet up with this man at North Midway Park in Broomfield, Colorado, where Kimball told them that he knew who and how Jennifer was murdered. He also stated that if they let him into their hotel room that night, he would show them how she died, even producing a contract for the wife to sign where she would give consent to bondage and intercourse with him. They refused the offer and left, certain they had met the man who killed their daughter. He would phone them a few weeks later, but refused to give any information, saying that they had their chance.
Or did you really know how my daughter died, actually?
I already told you what I knew. I told you what I can and can't say, and I already told you what I was willing to show you. Now listen, we're not going down this road, okay? You had your chance.
What do you...
You're down there and you regret it.
I couldn't let you perform those things on me.
Listen to me. All I asked you to do was look in your room. You wouldn't do that. You know, you're really lucky I'm talking to you now, so.
The only thing that means a damn thing to me is my daughter. And I don't know where in the hell she ended up.
Have your other daughter talk to me.
My other daughter?
Yeah.
You want my other daughter to talk to you.
Maybe she'll be reasonable.
What are you going to do, ask her to strip?
You have to understand, I have to protect myself here, so.
It doesn't sound at all, Joe, like you're protecting yourself. It sounds to me like you were doing it for gratification or just to, I don't know. It just doesn't sound like somebody that cares about...
It doesn't make sense to you? It seems kind of crazy, but that's just how it is.
Are you working for Jenny or against her?
I'm working for her, but you have to realize some things that I think are important that you know are classified, and I will be in huge trouble if I tell you. So I have to show you.
Well, I don't get it. What can you show me, Joe?
Well, listen, I gotta let you go.
I don't get it. What can you show me, Joe?
I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Joe.
Also at this time, the man that Jennifer and Steve and Ina supposedly wanted to kill would come forward, saying he believed Kimball was involved with her disappearance. The FBI would give Kimball another polygraph. This time, he failed when asked if he caused the disappearance of Jennifer. The carefully constructed fabrication of Hannibal Joe Snitch Scott Lee Kimball was crumbling. In October, Scott would move out of the home in Broomfield to this house at the corner of Flag and Baseline in Lafayette, leaving Lori to stay at the old house, and he began dating another woman, this time a 30-year-old in California. He would return Jennifer's belongings over to her parents, accompanied by Agent Schloff to supervise. In December that year, Scott would pull a trio of scams. First, lying to the insurance company that he had fully paid off his 1999 Jeep Cherokee and then total it. Next, he reported that his trailer was stolen from outside of Rocky Mountain All Natural Beef, collecting a further $10,000, saying it had been packed full of grills and coolers. In January, an optometrist who also operated out of this building returned home from vacation to learn that Kimball had stolen bank account information and taken $83,000, as well as forged $55,000 worth of checks. After asking Melissa Anderson to purchase him a rifle, Scott would flee the state. The case would be assigned to Lafayette detective Gary Thatcher, who began digging through Kimball's abandoned office and found a treasure trove of falsified documents, the supposedly stolen trailer, as well as learning about his stepdaughter's disappearance. In February 2005, the FBI would deactivate Kimball as an informant and issue a warrant for his arrest after failing to check in for probation. It was March 14th when police would get into a high-speed chase with Kimball in Colorado, during which he would phone his girlfriend and crank Rockstar by Nickelback to full volume until he finally ran out of gas. He would return to Denver to serve a 10-month jail sentence for violating probation, while the U.S. Attorney's Office built a case against him for his December scams. Referring to the prosecutors as the Boulder Bitches, they were aware of Markham's disappearance but had no evidence on that case. Meanwhile, Jennifer's parents had put up a billboard about their missing daughter in front of Shotgun Willie's and stating in an interview they had suspected Scott Kimball. This drew the attention of Casey's father, who connected them, and they would also learn of Terry Kimball's disappearance. The group came to the FBI with their findings, and Agent Jonathan Grusing would be assigned with 3 missing person cases of Jennifer, Casey, and Terry. On his laptop, searches for Jennifer Markham, numerous disturbing website visits, and 291 graphic images of women being assaulted were found. They also found photos of unknown women, amongst them one of Lee Ann Emery, taken just days before she went missing. By now, they were learning that their informant was not just a thief, he was a sadist.
I always want Lori to have hope that Casey will come home, because I don't know any different that she won't come home.
During a 6-hour interview, Scott refused to provide information on the 3 missing persons unless he was given immunity for his crimes, as well as saying Casey was still alive.
I don't know anything about poor little Casey. I don't know where she's at. I don't know anything about Casey.
It was September 29, 2007, when a hunter walking in the thick woods of Route National Forest stopped for a moment to take a break. He would notice the sun was glinting off an object nearby. It was a skull. Knowing that it was supposed to snow, he would tie a rope to the closest tree and carefully put the skull in his backpack, taking it to the police. Though entered into the database, the FBI would not learn of this unknown person for another 6 months. During this time, Agent Grusing had identified Lee Ann as the woman in the photograph, and Kimball as the man who had been involved with her. He also decided to contact the park department at Route, learning about the remains found 6 months earlier. The FBI would identify them as Casey McLeod, but could not determine the cause of death. A search in the former Broomfield home would find bloodstains in the living room, which were determined to match Terry Kimball. In December, Kimball was sentenced to 48 years prison time for his Lafayette fraud, but detectives wanted more, needing to make what they referred to as a deal with the devil. In return for only being charged with a single count of second-degree murder, Kimball would draw maps of the locations he hid the bodies in Utah. On March 11, 2009, the Ann Emery's bones would be found in Bryson Canyon. Though he stated Jennifer was buried nearby, after 3 searches, nothing could be found, and it was believed Kimball was toying with them. On June 29, 2009, enough snow had melted that searching in the mountains where Terry was said to be buried could commence, and off a logging road near the top of Vale Pass, the body was found wrapped in a tarp. He had been shot in the head. For failing to deliver Markham's body, the plea deal was revoked, and Scott Lee Kimball was sentenced to 70 additional years in prison. The case used as a campaign point by Colorado Attorney General Stan Garnett, who ran commercials touting his prosecution of Kimball against his rival, John Suthers, who had been the one to sign the deal allowing Kimball to work as an informant back in 2003.
Good afternoon, my name is Ed Coet, and I am the family spokesperson for Scott Lee Kimball, and I assure you that Scott's family was also shaken and distressed by this, and I would remind you that they are also victims. They also lost a family member. This is Scott's statement. I, Scott Lee Kimball, have pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder in the 2nd degree. This was part of a plea bargain arrangement. I am sorry for my crimes. I accept full responsibility for my role in these murders. I deserve to be held accountable and punished for my crimes. However, I did not act alone.
What's how you purpose in marrying me and murdering my daughter?
Pardon me?
What would be the purpose
in marrying me and murdering my daughter?
Scott's answer to that, and you know, I'm very sorry for this, is that he says that they themselves were involved in the criminal
There's
crime.
absolutely no way.
Absolutely not.
There's no way. Absolutely.
But thank you for that answer. That clears everything up for me.
Let me just... That clears up the book.
Everything that was just said was just false.
I'm just...
We're hoping to have some kind of a legitimate either apology. It's sad that he needs to contrive something that's so deep. It's ridiculous, and it's going to.
I asked Scott.
Went with him.
Okay, I asked Scott. Okay, and I want you to understand, please. I'm giving you his statement, not mine. Okay?
But
do you believe it?
Write a book, correct?
Do you believe it? Yes, I am writing a book.
Yes.
There you are.
It's fabrications.
Okay.
But even behind bars, Scott's lies continued. He would be caught forging documents. He told police he had merely witnessed the murders, which were done by drug dealers, while other times bragging he had committed dozens of murders. While they knew he was a liar, they weren't sure, stating anything was possible, and they had opened an investigation into several other cases. Bringing a stack of victims, in exchange for a possible new plea deal, Kimball placed question marks on the cases he may have been responsible for. The first was the murder of 7-year-old Tracy Neef. It was March 16, 1984, when the girl's mother dropped her off at school, Bertha Hyde Elementary in Thornton, Colorado. They were 10 minutes late that day, so the other children were already inside, and it is believed the doors she normally entered were already locked, forcing Tracy to have to walk behind the school to find another way in. She would never make it inside. That afternoon, 40 miles northwest, someone pulling onto a gravel road overlooking the Barker Reservoir in Nederland spotted a child's coat and lunchbox scattered around. They would collect the items and place them together. About 3 hours later, a tourist and his son pulled over to read the historical marker when they spotted Tracy's body lying 20 feet from the road. She had been strangled. An autopsy would show that she had fought her attacker when he unsuccessfully tried to molest her. Kimball would be suspected based on statements he gave that he helped his cousin bury a girl in Nederland, though Tracy was left above ground. It is also worth noting that Ted Payton's cabin was alongside the Barker Reservoir, which Scott was still being taken to in the early 80s. It was February 11, 1987, when a man riding his bicycle past what was then a vacant lot of Landings Drive in Fort Collins would stop to investigate what he thought was a mannequin, only to discover the mutilated body of 37-year-old Peggy Hetrick. The night prior, someone had attacked the woman as she was walking home from the bar and dragged her 100 feet into the field, where they stabbed her, cut off her left nipple, and partially removed her vulva. Police would question 15-year-old Timothy Masters, who lived in a trailer just south of the field after his father reported seeing the boy walking into the field earlier that morning. Tim would state he too had noticed the body, but thought it was a mannequin left as a prank. However, upon searching his home, police would find over 2,000 pages of graphic drawings and writings of violence, along with a knife collection.
Yesterday, did you murder that girl?
No.
Other than what you've told me during your entire life, did you ever even once hurt anyone?
No.
Are you the one who stabbed that girl?
No.
Despite an inconclusive polygraph, no evidence on the knives, and hairs found on Peggy not matching, police would charge Masters for her murder in 1999. 9 years later, his conviction would be overturned and the case reopened. Kimball would be investigated due to another similar murder he was suspected in, but when skin cells and hair fibers did not match him, he was cleared in Peggy's case. Other suspects in the case involved Peggy's ex-boyfriend and Dr. Richard Hammond, who also lived in a home overlooking the field. In 1995, he was arrested for secretly filming close-ups of women's genitals so that he took his life just days later. On April 20th, 1998, the body of a middle-aged woman was found on the side of Utah State Road 276 near Maidenwater, Utah. After shooting her in the head, her killer took the time to remove her fingertips, wrap her body in plastic bags tied with duct tape and rope, then placed it inside a sleeping bag and rolled it in a carpet. Authorities would investigate the Maidenwater doe as a victim of Kimball due to him using the same complicated knots on one of his victims, as well as the child's blanket found near the body matching one that his son had. In 2008, after a new push to identify the victim, authorities would confirm via familial DNA that the victim was Lena Reyes Geddes, an immigrant from Mexico who had married Edwin Geddes in 1996. Edward would be questioned in her disappearance, but as the body was not identified, no one knew they were even looking for a homicide, and he would take his own life in 2001, 21 years before DNA found on the ropes would confirm him as the killer. Another case Kimball was suspected of was the 2001 murder of prosecutor Tom Wales that Kimball had previously said he had information on. While incarcerated, Kimball had told another inmate he had once picked a woman up off of Colfax Avenue in Denver, strangled her, and used acid to see what it would do to her skin. This flagged investigators to the 2004 case of Katrina Powell. The unhoused woman was last seen walking near Colfax and Ogden in Denver the night of October 24, 2004. Less than 4 hours later, police would find the nude body of a woman lying near a dumpster behind this plaza in Westminster, a northern suburb of the city about 25 minutes north from where Katrina was last seen. Her hands had been cut off and she had severe head injuries. Someone had strangled her and her skin had chemical burns. This last bit of information was never released to the public, which made Kimball's statement all the more credible. This case is the one that also drew investigators to the Peggy Hetrick case, as Katrina was noted as having a similar wound to her genitals and a slash on her breast. Finally, in 2010, police would question Kimball in the West Mesa bone collector case, where the remains of 11 women were discovered buried outside Albuquerque, New Mexico, killed between 2001 and 2005. In 2009, another inmate would tell the FBI Kimball and another inmate had talked to him about helping them escape and murder 2 people, one of whom was Kimball's former business associate. Now, on the other side of being set up, it was 2017 when the inmate was released and Kimball and the other man were arrested when they were caught in the prison yard waiting for a helicopter that was to land.
Notorious Colorado serial killer Scott Lee Kimball will be charged with attempting to escape from prison and solicitation for murder, according to a CBS 4 investigation. Kimball is serving 70 years in prison after pleading guilty to 4 murders, his uncle and 3 acquaintances who all disappeared in 2003 and 2004.
He is also remarried to a woman serving time for child abuse in a Kansas prison, though they have never met in person.
You cross a line, there's no going back. Well, you have to remember, I'm a criminal. Criminals are involved in bad things.
Finally, in 2011, Kimball would write a massive 147-page letter to his cousin, author Ed Coet, where he confessed to the 4 murders after finding a religion. In 2012, the FBI launched an internal investigation on how they could hire and enable a serial killer, suspending Schlaf for 3 weeks, reducing it to 1 week after an appeal.
I keep referring to them as the most elite police force in the world because that's what they call themselves, and it kind of reminds me of the Keystone Cops and the Three Stooges.
While authorities may wish to brush their enabling and funding a serial killer to operate, until Scott decides to come clean, we may never know the location of Jennifer Markham or just how many other victims the man who referred to himself as Hannibal may have had.